Here we go. We can see, right, the screen. Okay, so in my constant effort to make Andres really, really uncomfortable, we're going to be using the app that I built that allows you guys to interact with the presentation in real time. So, and it also takes away the presenter view. So double good luck to you, Andres. But if you see that QR code down there at the bottom, let me see if I can zoom in. You're more than welcome to scan that on your phone, and you'll be brought to a page that looks like a little remote. Somebody's
There you
found
go.
it. So as Andres and I talk and we say something cool or something that blows your mind, something you agree with, yeah, Andres, good luck, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna love this. Yeah.
Or if you want to add a comment, that's in there too. You can throw a comment. Please don't be inappropriate. I will turn them off if you do. All right, let me zoom back out. For anyone that can't scan that but still wants to see it, let me figure out how to put it in the chat window. You can go there and see it on your computer. Yeah, it is
There we
great.
go.
I also will point out, Jack, just because you said that, I can turn it off at any time right here on the bottom where it says reactions are live. I won't hesitate to do it. Okay, so with that out of the way, welcome everybody. And thank you for joining Andres and I to talk about what serverless means. This is actually, I wanted to talk about this based on the conversations that we had last week and kind of that intro call to the community. So let's just dive straight in, and I'll talk about some of the motivation for this. Just real quick before we start, Andres and I, uh, if you've met either one of us in person, chances are you've met the other one too. We go pretty much everywhere together. Andres and I have worked together for a really long time. We don't anymore, but we still talk every day. I call him before I go to sleep, and then he calls me when he wakes up in the morning.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's true. That's true.
but on an actual serious note, Andres and I both launched cloud native teams where Andres currently works at Tyler Technologies. We were in charge of R&D teams for a while to figure out how we go from on-prem into the cloud. We were pretty much given free reign. We were given a year to do any R&D that we wanted, and we opted to go serverless and everything that we all like to talk about. So that's really what's helped form our opinions with what we're going to be talking about today. So, if you didn't attend the meeting last week, these were some of the things that I overheard when I was fly on the walling and just observing the community talk. We were talking about serverless. We were talking about what this community is going to bring, and there were some opinions in there like serverless is an overused marketing term. A big one that I heard multiple times was that people assume Lambda when they hear serverless, and that's not it's not really right. And what we're going to talk about is why that's not right, and kind of try to level set really in general, and try to lay the ground rules for what is serverless, what's not. So I really hope that we can all agree on what I'm about to say, because I'm not going to change my opinion, and we'll just go from there. So I'd actually talked about this a lot, and I've written about this a lot of blog posts on why serverless is a confusing term. Like, why do we even talk about it? We talk about it a lot. If you guys go on Twitter or X, uh, we talk about it a lot. We go in waves. There are times where we don't really talk about it. Then there's times where everybody is talking about this is serverless, this isn't serverless. Why is it not? And there's just a lot of confusion in general. So we end up talking about it a lot and over and over and over again. And I'm going to say my guess. The reason we talk about it is honestly because we did a bad job defining it, because I have actually never seen a true definition of what serverless is. Now, what I have seen is the litmus test that Momento put out a year and a half ago for what serverless means, and everybody seems to reference that. I like it. I tried to reword it a little bit better for conciseness, and we're going to take a look. I'll take a look at that. But what I want you to take away above everything else that we're about to talk about for the next however many minutes is that serverless refers to a set of capabilities. It's not about not being servers, because we know there are. It's about the capabilities that a service provides. And so, that's I led with the one that everybody assumes is the only one that means serverless, and that's usage-based pricing with no minimums. That's the one that usually sets the bar where if I have to pay for it to exist, then it's not serverless. It's like your electricity bill, right? If you don't use any electricity, you're not charged for anything. That's what people typically associate as the capstone. This is serverless. But there's other things too. There's other nuance that are equally as important as that usage-based pricing. Things like no instances. And again, it kind of comes back to the if I have to pay for it, then if I had to pay for it to exist, then it's not serverless. But this is really think about it like a virtual machine. No instances to provision or manage. That would be I don't have to select an instance type. I don't have to run patches and automations on the actual physical hardware that's running my system. That's not serverless. We don't do that. The always available thing. There's no downtime. It's something that's just there and it just works. Again, kind of like your electricity. Unless you're in Texas and it's frozen everywhere, then it doesn't work. But otherwise, it's always on. There's no downtime that you have to plan for or accommodate for. It just is. And then the last thing, there's nuance to the way that this is written, that it is instantly ready with a single API call. That means best practices, configurations, everything that you would do to tune hardware is kind of built in for you. It's something that you don't have to worry about at all. You can if you want, but you don't have to alter it for your use cases. So these four things, to me, is what serverless is. Pause for dramatic effect.
Big gulp.
Thank you. Okay, let's continue. So we're going to do a little test. We're going to look at those four things, and we're going to look at some services, and we're going to decide if they're serverless or not. We're going to look at DynamoDB, which is one that I don't think has any contention on whether or not we think it is serverless or not. We're going to look at Momento Topics because I work there and I know a lot about it. We're going to talk about it. And then we're going to talk about OpenSearch Serverless, which was actually one of the services that was called out last week that people say is not serverless, but nobody really says why it's not. So we're going to look at those and we're going to compare those to the four rules that we have for serverless. So the first one we're going to look at is usage-based pricing with no minimums. And the first thing we're looking at is DynamoDB. We're going to go through each one of the four things, first looking at Dynamo, and then Momento, and then OpenSearch. So the first one, I pulled this from the DynamoDB documentation, and it's priced by write requests and read requests. Not about how many tables, not about uptime or cost per hour. It's literally how much it's being used. And to me, that kind of checks those boxes. That's a serverless pricing right there because the billing unit is how much you're using it. Cool. Everybody agrees. I should probably put in a negative emoji in here, but that might come back to bite me. But for things like this, it probably would have been good. Anyway, let's keep going. So Momento Topics. This is the pricing metric for Momento. Data transfer. 50 cents. Yes, data storage. Tico, that's a great question. Does data storage count as usage? Totally. If you're not using it, there's no data storage. There's no storage in there. But if you are using it and you're pushing data in there all the time, that's a usage cost. And now it's a recurring cost, but it's because you used it. For Memento here, again, this is for data transfer. So it's 50 cents into and out of the service. If you're not using it, you're not charged for anything. And to me, that says usage-based. Cool. Now, OpenSearch, there's a lot to this. There was a lot of documentation. There's a lot that kind of sends you around. But if you see here, let's see if my mouse shows up. Hopefully it shows up. We have 24 cents per OpenSearch capacity unit per hour. There's a red flag to me. It's per hour. So this is uptime, an hourly thing. Now, what's not listed in the docs, I actually had to go through Amazon Q to find. Don't haze me on that one. Is that there is a minimum, you're charged a minimum of 2 of these OCUs at all times. So there's not a no use, no charge. There's a minimum of 2, and then it just goes up from there. So that minimum of 2 means that no matter what, I am paying for it to exist. And that to me says that's a strike on usage-based pricing with no minimums. It's more if you have a production setup, but the minimum, the complete minimum setup for OpenSearch serverless is 2. So let's move on to no instances to provision or manage. Now, this again comes from the DynamoDB docs, and I circled the part that's really relevant to this. No servers to provision, patch, or manage, and 0 administration, which means that that is all completely abstracted away from me as a consumer, and I don't ever have to worry about something getting out of date, out of sync, because it follows the shared responsibility model, and I'm just worried about my app logic. So that's a yes. That is yes. That is a serverless service when it comes to no instances to provision. Now, Memento topics, we have no API structure to build or connections to manage. It's completely abstracted away. We just have API calls that does your business logic for you. That was really well said. But there's no infrastructure. It just works. It's just API calls that you're doing, and you don't have to set up buses. You don't have to set up topics. There's nothing really that you're provisioning or anything. So take my word for that one. Definitely serverless. Now here's a good one for OpenSearch. Moving on to that one again. And again, this comes from Amazon Q. I really didn't want to wade through what felt like hundreds of pages of documentation for OpenSearch. But it did say that the service does automatically provision all of the instances for you, which is good. And it handles the administration and the software updates for you automatically. So it's the one that is managing this infrastructure for you. And in my book, that's actually a yes. So I would say that's a good indicator that that could be a serverless service. Moving on, always available and reliable, this uptime kind of thing, uptime and how are we going to prevent disaster from being totally disastrous. So DynamoDB, this is again from the documentation. There are no maintenance windows. When they are doing maintenance, it's 0 downtime. It's automatically replicated. I don't think I have it in here, but it's automatically replicated across availability zones in region. It is a highly, highly available, highly redundant system. So really the big thing here, the way that I describe this one specifically, is this no maintenance windows thing. That's a really big deal. I don't have to plan. I don't have to inform my customers that at 2 a.m. on Friday night, we're going to be running a system update and you're not going to be able to use it. So yes, that is serverless. Memento topics, we have kind of the same thing. There is no operational maintenance for anybody to take care of because you're not provisioning anything. You don't have to keep that maintained and install updates and just really allow you to focus on your business logic. In addition, it does have that multi-zonal redundancy. So your data is being replicated inside of the same region across availability zones for you, which is going to make that more reliable, significantly less lossy. Check. Great. Let's take a look here at OpenSearch. Now, this is one that I actually sat here at my computer and I was reading the docs and I was like, I'm confused a little bit. I think this is one that's going to have, it's not clear in the documentation what exactly my responsibility is, but it does say on some of your patches and upgrades, you can configure them to go in an off-peak maintenance window. Now, it does say that it is a non-downtime thing. If there is a disruption, it fails over to something in another availability zone. But it just left me confused. Like if the documentation leaves you confused and not super comfortable on the status of whether or not it's serverless, is it? So this one I didn't actually put yes or no. I genuinely don't know this one because I haven't used it. So not a strike against, but it's also not a pro. And that came from Amazon Q as well. I did not get that straight from the docs. Okay, last one. Let's look at this last one real quick. So instantly ready with a single API call. I typically use DynamoDB in on-demand mode, at least when you're starting off and you don't know the traffic and you don't know how to really accurately provision your capacity. On-demand mode is super nice. And when you do on-demand mode, it is immediately available. So you can have code that says create table, and the next line is put item into that table, and it will work because that capacity is already allocated for you at the result of that first call. So it's immediately up. So with that, yes, that is instantly ready with a single API call. Now the caveat there really for DynamoDB is if you are using provision capacity, it does slow it down a little bit, has to actually get that stuff up and running, but on-demand mode, totally. Momento, yes, I'm pretty sure you'll read, if you go through our documentation, you'll read single API call probably 100 times because we really emphasize the simplicity of the solution. It's the capacity is always there. It's always ready for you to use. And we've built it around developer experience. So it is instantly ready. Like you can do the same exact thing you can do with DynamoDB, create cache, set, and it works in microseconds. Now, this last one, I could not get clear information again out of the documentation for OpenSearch. Amazon Q said yes. Yes, it is instantly available when you create a collection. It's not called an instance. It's called a collection in OpenSearch Serverless. So I went in and tried it this morning, actually. I created a collection in OpenSearch Serverless, and I said, let's try to write to it immediately. Hit create, gave it a name, test, and then I stood on the screen for 8 minutes until it stopped creating. So no, this one did not pass the serverless test for me because I waited for 8 minutes for it to be readily available. After that 8 minutes, yes, I could put things in there and have it indexed and search for it, but that is not instantly ready. So no. Now, let's take all that. Let's look at it. Is it serverless? DynamoDB, yes. Topics, yes. OpenSearch serverless, nah, not really. Not really. Not if the 4 things that I defined at the beginning of this, if you subscribe to that theory. If you do subscribe to it, here are your results for these 3 services, the ones that we all know and love.
And as a consumer of OpenSearch, right, it's still a big improvement, right, from going to OpenSearch serverless. It's just mislabeled, right now, going through the test and all that. But it's still a huge improvement as a consumer because you do have to manage less, right? It got a check mark, but there's still a lot more left to desire as far as making it serverless and meeting the criteria.
I was actually really happy when OpenSearch serverless came out because Andres, you and I were working together, and we were a big consumer of OpenSearch. And while it wasn't serverless in the sense that it felt like Lambda, it was actually a significantly less cost overall month to month. So I was happy with it regardless. It's not a complete bust of a service at all.
And Tycho put a comment there where serverless versus managed services, right? And I was talking to Alan yesterday. I said, well, it feels like every serverless service is a managed service, but not every managed service is serverless, right? So there's that differentiation.
Yep. Okay. And now it's time for our smooth handoff. Andres, you're up. I'm going to be quiet.
Cool. Smooth handoff. Thank you. Move the slide, Alan. So now Alan defined what is true serverless. We went through a few services, but one of the big misconceptions is that serverless means Lambda, right? Or it's function as a service. But some unknown serverless mastermind once said, serverless is more than Lambda, right? So let's go. I want to go through a few workflows where we talk about serverless without even touching a Lambda. So next slide, please. This is a common pattern, and widely used, but this is what people usually think. I come from a REST API world, so you'll see a lot of API gateway, but this easily applies to like AppSync and stuff like that. But API gateway to Lambda function, run business logic, return a 200 response, you're good to go, right? But there's more to that. Next slide, please. So beyond the Lambda function, right? There's more. There's step functions. We already spoke about DynamoDB, Memento topics. You got Event Bridge for event buses, and there's many more. Like SNS, SQS, SES, right? S3 is one of them. And one of the common workflows that I've seen a lot online is for file processing, right? It's how do you process a file and without looking at the Lambda? It's you got an S3 bucket, you put an object in that S3 bucket, you trigger an event from S3 over to Event Bridge, and with pipes, you can then trigger a step function. And from there, you can run transcriptions, redactions, OCR, text to speech, right? Anything you want to do processing a file. And some of these, like transcribe, you can call directly from a step function and all that, but you can do it without invoking a Lambda in between. Next use case, Alan. One that a lot of people don't know about. I know a lot of people do, but I see a wide gap here, and it's with direct integrations. So again, with API gateway, you can go directly to a step function, for example, without the Lambda function proxy. So usually what we see is API gateway to Lambda to step function, where the Lambda function is just taking the input from the request, manipulating a little bit, and then sending to step function. We can actually do that with direct integrations. I already hear the voices saying, yeah, but VTL sucks. Yes, but like just to invoke a step function, it's not that bad, right? And you get used to it and you learn a lot, as with everything. Could it be better? Yes. When we got JavaScript resolvers for AppSync, I'm like, yes, okay, so maybe someday we'll get this for to replace VTL with API gateway. I'm still keeping my hopes up. Another common use case is API gateway to Dynamo, right? Again, this can get rather complicated if your data model has a lot of optional fields and all that, because you need to handle all that with VTL and a marshaled DynamoDB object, which also makes it a little bit more complicated to handle. But again, simple CRUD operations, you can easily go directly to the AWS services. This is just two of them. You can actually go to every AWS service. Is there a limitation with that, Alan? You've played with that a lot more.
Yeah, it's a lot of them. I don't know if it's everyone, but definitely a lot. I did one to Amazon Translate one time from API Gateway and just did like a little Spanish translator like that.
Cool. So yeah, you can see without even invoking a Lambda function, you can get serverless workflows. And again, even within the step function, you can have direct integrations within the step function, removing that compute with Lambda function. you got to balance the complexity because you don't want to risk maintainability just because you want to be clever and not call a Lambda function, right? So keep that in mind always. Moving forward. So here's another a little bit more complex workflow that I've seen. I've used this flow and I've used it for data propagation. So it's extending one of the ones I had before, but now we're attaching a DynamoDB stream. So you can go save data into DynamoDB and then trigger more your business logic afterwards, right? So this is a pattern called storage first. I don't know if it's not that widely known. And there's several ones. One is with DynamoDB. You then trigger either DynamoDB streams or Kinesis stream and then go from there, right? You can hook up to an event bridge pipe, or you can hook up a pipe into DynamoDB stream to then trigger whatever you need, right? A step function, a Lambda function, or whatnot. I use it for data propagation, working with DynamoDB. I find myself denormalizing data for specific access patterns. So when a specific piece of data changes, I want to propagate that. And I want to propagate it in an async manner so that I don't have a user waiting for me to do all that I need to do because I decided to design my system this way, right? So we go this route, propagate the data, and then it's updated everywhere. I saw an example from Alan doing this flow on putting it in a cache, right? So you do the database change, then put in a cache or update a cache to then have the updated data. A lot of more use cases you can use for this. Next slide, Alan. And then if you've worked with serverless, you obviously know you can't escape the Lambda, right? It's going to be there, whether you like it or not. It's a good service to stitch things together when you don't have the capabilities. So, and this one is more recent release from CloudWatch, where you can directly trigger a Lambda from alert state transitions. So in here, to react to issues, you can have an alarm, and once it changes the state, we trigger a Lambda function, and then we go further and send it to EventBridge, SMS, whatever you need to either self-heal if you have those capabilities, or just let people know, or just be more reactive or proactive instead of, it's kind of proactive, but you're still reacting to issues in your system. So at the end, with all these serverless services, whether it's from AWS, Momenta, or anything, they're simply building blocks that we then put together to build our dream home using Legos, right? So we use these building blocks to build the applications and the services that meet our business needs. Believe in serverless.
Did you want me to, you ready for me to progress the slide, Andres?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool.
So thank
And
you.
there we are.
Does anybody have any questions or just conversations? I didn't keep track of any comments in the chat. Did you, Alan?
I was watching. Yep. Yep. I'm going to assume that silence meant that everybody agreed. And that makes me really happy.
I'm not saying I disagree, but not trying to derail the conversation, but very curious on your thoughts on, I'm going to link an article in the chat regarding viewing serverless as spectrum instead of like absolutes. I'm not suggesting you're wrong, just curious on people's thoughts about that.
Alan's always told me, don't be a fundamentalist, right? So, and here you can be rather fundamentalist with this rules, right? So don't discard using some, I mean, it's serverless first. That's the mentality. It's not serverless only. So don't discard services just because they don't truly fall into serverless guidelines. And it being a spectrum, well, up to the person's perspective, right? Where it falls in that. It's just so open.
I feel
Having
like
that
you're
third
just
party
doing
filter.
that quote from Big Lebowski. It's like, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah.
Ben's not usually wrong. I mean, I'll throw that out there. I respect Ben's opinion very much and agree with what he said. This is Ben Kehoe, not Ben Pyle.
Yeah, not me.
Don't yeah, not Ben Pyle.
Not me. I didn't write this.
That's a good resource though, Danielle. Thank you for sharing that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Definitely agree with everything that you all said, but yeah, just kind of, well, you know, coming from like government type of stuff, it's like I currently work in healthcare, and sometimes you kind of have to meet people where they are to a degree, and it's like you could kind of use the spectrum as kind of a nice way to push them towards the serverless way, assuming that's the best choice for that workload. It's not always the case, but
That is true. I also don't really subscribe to the everything needs to be serverless all the time mentality. It needs to solve the business problem in the best possible way is what I like.
The right tool for the job. And
Mhm.
again, and working with document processing and all that, sometimes serverless is not the best use case for, or the best use for processing documents in a Lambda function, because it can get rather expensive and slow as well. So you got to, again, find the right tool for the job and not be a purist.
For me, I like these conversations because we have all these conversations about things, and if we're not on the same page about what serverless means, then we're talking around each other, right? Like that was one of my big frustrations. I've had a lot of the same comments that you had here today over the last couple of years, and I'm like, this is what serverless means to me. When I'm talking about it, this is what it means. And if it means something different to you, like it does apparently to AWS now, then I'm not on the same page with you when we're having a conversation. And like that's where it becomes challenging. So getting on the same page, even if we don't agree, down at the core, at least we need to understand where we don't agree.
Andres and I, when we were working together, used to say a very difficult to say sentence, but it was very powerful. It was, you need to establish a ubiquitous language. And it's a hard sentence to say because ubiquitous is hard to say. But really what that means is that we have to be on the same page and make sure that you know what everybody's talking about when they say something. So I totally agree, Jason, with that. Yep.
I was
All right.
curious if you had any thoughts on architecting your infrastructure and code in a way that if you choose one or the other first, you can easily move between, like, hey, document processing was good for serverless when I had 5 documents a month, but now that we're doing, you know, a couple hundred or thousands or millions, like we want to switch this. What are your thoughts on that?
Andres, do you want to do that one? Because we had that before. We've done that.
Yeah, and it's part of the serverless first mindset, and it's easier to go from serverless to something else than the other way around, right? So if you start running EC2 instances or containers or something like that, and you say, hey, you know, this workload might be better for serverless, it's a harder transition, in my opinion, than starting serverless and moving to the other type of architecture. And it's not a terrible migration, right? We did this because we were running virus scan, right? And we were doing it in Lambda functions to virus scan PDFs or any type of file. And it got rather slow and expensive again. If you have a chunky Lambda function running for a minute, it's not going to be nice in the pocket. So you start evaluating those switches, and again, you can take this chunk of code and move it somewhere else, and it's easy. If you're relying on the infrastructure and all that beforehand, it's harder to abstract it.
I think we all saw that Prime Video blog post last year, and I could see by the smiles on everybody's faces that most of us did. And it was a really good use case on starting serverless to get to market fastest. That's why they opted for the things that they did. They designed it all serverlessly using Lambda, step functions, S3. I think it was they were doing video processing. It was like one specific service inside of Prime Video. And it worked great. They got it out to market. They learned a bunch of lessons. And then they started looking at that bill that went up and up and up because it grew. And then they actually understood what that workload was going to be. And they migrated it out to, I think it was a container-based thing. And a lot of people took that message the wrong way. They think everyone was saying Amazon doesn't do serverless anymore. They don't recommend that. But that's definitely not what the message was of that blog post. Starting serverless, let them get to results the fastest because it does enable you to build faster, like genuinely. And then you learn and then you adjust. I mean, software's never done. So making sure that you can get tangible artifacts out the fastest possible leads to your end result moving up your timeline, even if it's completely different than the way you started. Well, all right. This was a good talk. Yes, I love it. Next week, same time, same place, we have Ben and George Mao coming back. And this time it is Ben Pyle to talk about serverless observability. Ben, can I put you on the spot and have you tease us with what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, I am on the spot, so thank you. No, so I think we're gonna really kind of touch on things that I think are important when paying attention to serverless and what you might want to monitor, and going back to when it's time to pivot or when it might be time to think about a different workload. What are those concepts and areas that you might pay attention to? There may be some discussion on open telemetry. I know George has got some things inside Capital One that'll be really cool to hear how they're doing it at really, really large scale. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit across the board. And I was on the spot, so thank you.
Happy to do that. Happy to do that. Yes. If you want, I can let you put your presentation in this little presentation tool. We can throw reactions at you.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. So let me get PowerPoint up and get a blank screen, and then we can just go ahead and show it to everybody.
Perfect. Perfect. One other thing that I like to do when I present with this page is I like to see who was trying to distract me the most. So I built this page to see who it was. Andres. It was Andres? Seriously?
I forget about this
Speechless on that
part
one.
of your presentations.
Okay. Well, that just derailed me completely. I don't even have any words anymore.
Number 14 is interesting.
AI note taker.